The dinner plates clinked against the mahogany table as my sister Stephanie adjusted her designer bracelet for what felt like the 100th time tonight. The sound echoed through our parents' dining room in suburban Denver, where 23 members of the Martinez family had gathered for our annual Christmas Eve celebration. Snow fell steadily outside the bay windows, creating a perfect backdrop for what was about to become another evening of public humiliation disguised as family bonding. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Isabella Martinez, and at 29, I've grown accustomed to being the family's cautionary tale. While my younger sister Stephanie climbed her way to becoming a successful real estate attorney, marrying her law school sweetheart Marcus Thompson and building what everyone considered the perfect life, I had chosen a different path. One that my family never quite understood. I worked as a children's book illustrator, spending my days creating whimsical worlds filled with talking animals and magical adventures. My small apartment in the arts district of downtown Denver was cluttered with canvases, watercolor palettes, and stacks of manuscript submissions from hopeful authors. The rent was affordable, the neighborhood was quirky, and most importantly, it was mine. But to my family, especially Stephanie, my lifestyle represented everything wrong with pursuing passion over practicality. Stephanie sat at the far end of the table next to her husband Marcus, a successful investment banker whose family owned 3 vacation homes and a yacht they barely used. She wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves that somehow managed to look effortless despite the obvious professional touch. Marcus, with his sharp jawline and expensive suit, looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. They were the golden couple of our extended family, the success story that everyone else was supposed to aspire to. Our parents, Carmen and Roberto Martinez, had built their small landscaping business from nothing when they immigrated from Mexico 30 years ago. They worked 16-hour days to send both their daughters to college, never complaining about the sacrifice, always believing that education would open doors they never had access to. When Stephanie graduated summa cum laude from law school and immediately landed a position at one of Denver's most prestigious firms, their pride was immeasurable. When I graduated with a fine arts degree and announced my intention to illustrate children's books, their confusion was equally evident. Not that they didn't love me. Our parents supported my choices with the kind of worried affection reserved for children who insist on walking tightropes without nets. But I could see the questions in their eyes during family gatherings, the subtle comparisons they tried not to make between their successful daughter and their artistic one. Stephanie had never been shy about making those comparisons explicit. Tonight's gathering included our usual cast of characters. Aunt Rosa and Uncle Miguel sat near the kitchen, their 3 teenage children texting under the table while pretending to listen to adult conversation. Our grandparents, Abuela Elena and Abuelo Francisco, occupied the seats of honor closest to the fireplace, where the warmth helped ease their arthritis. Various cousins, second cousins, and family friends filled the remaining chairs, creating the kind of multi-generational chaos that defined Martinez family celebrations. The evening had started innocently enough. Our mother had prepared her famous tamales, the recipe passed down from her grandmother, and the house smelled like cumin, chili, and fresh masa. Everyone had arrived bearing gifts and stories from the past year, catching up on marriages, divorces, new babies, and job changes. I'd spent the first hour playing with my cousin's toddler, sketching quick cartoon characters on napkins to keep him entertained while the adults talked. Stephanie had arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that somehow managed to draw everyone's attention without appearing intentional. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted their place in the world, never questioned whether their choices were the right ones, never wondered if there might be more to success than a corner office and a 6-figure salary. Marcus followed behind her, carrying expensive wine and wearing the kind of smile that suggested he was genuinely happy to be there. He'd always been polite to me, asking about my artwork with what seemed like genuine interest, though I suspected he was just being diplomatic. After all, what could an investment banker and a children's book illustrator possibly have in common? The trouble started during dessert, when our Aunt Rosa made the mistake of asking me about my career. "Isabella, how's the drawing business going? Are you still doing those little books for children?" The question was innocent enough, but I could see Stephanie's eyes light up with opportunity. She'd been unusually quiet throughout dinner, and I should have recognized the signs. Stephanie was never quiet unless she was planning something. "Actually," I said, cutting into my slice of Tres Leches cake, "I just finished illustrating a series about ocean conservation for kids. The publisher thinks it might be picked up for a television adaptation." It was true, though I'd downplayed the significance. The publisher was actually one of the largest children's book companies in the country, and the television deal was with a major streaming service. But I'd learned over the years that sharing good news in my family often led to Stephanie finding ways to diminish it. "That's wonderful, Mija," our mother said, beaming with pride. "You should show everyone the pictures you drew." Before I could respond, Stephanie cleared her throat with the kind of deliberate sound that indicated she was about to take center stage. "Speaking of careers," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of false modesty that had become her signature, "Marcus and I have some news to share." The table fell silent, all attention shifting to the golden couple. Marcus reached over to squeeze Stephanie's hand, his face glowing with obvious excitement. "We just closed on our new house in Cherry Hills Village," Stephanie announced, naming one of Denver's most exclusive neighborhoods. "4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a view of the mountains that you have to see to believe." The table erupted in congratulations and excited questions. Cherry Hills Village was where celebrities and business executives lived, where houses started at 7 figures and went up from there. Our parents looked stunned, pride and worry competing on their faces as they processed the implications of such an expensive purchase. "How much land?" asked Uncle Miguel, who understood property values from his years in construction. 2 acres, Marcus replied, his voice warm with satisfaction. "We're planning to put in a pool next spring, and Stephanie wants to start a garden." "A garden," laughed our cousin Sophia. "Stephanie, you kill houseplants." Everyone chuckled, but Stephanie waved off the comment with practiced grace. "That's what landscapers are for. We're not going to do the work ourselves." The casual mention of hiring landscapers stung in a way I hadn't expected. Our parents had built their entire livelihood around maintaining other people's gardens, working in the Colorado heat and cold to keep wealthy neighborhoods looking pristine. The idea that their daughter now lived on the other side of that equation, employing people like them rather than being employed by people like her new neighbors, represented a kind of success that was both admirable and somehow heartbreaking. "The mortgage must be enormous," said Aunt Rosa, ever practical. Stephanie's smile became even brighter. "Actually, we put down 60%. Marcus's bonus from the Henderson merger was substantial enough that we didn't want to carry much debt." 60% down on a Cherry Hills Village property meant they'd paid cash in the mid-6 figures just for the down payment. I felt my stomach tighten as I realized the full scope of what my sister was announcing. This wasn't just news about a house purchase. This was a declaration of financial arrival, a statement about the kind of success that our family could barely imagine. "That's incredible," breathed our grandmother, shaking her head in amazement. "When I think about the little apartment your mother and father shared when you girls were babies, and now look at this." The comparison hung in the air, unspoken but obvious. Stephanie had transcended the economic circumstances of her childhood in the most dramatic way possible. While I still lived in an apartment not much different from the one our parents had shared 29 years ago, Marcus leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention and admiration. "The firm's been incredible this year. We've handled some of the largest real estate transactions in Colorado history, and Stephanie's been instrumental in structuring the legal frameworks. It's not just about the money," Stephanie added, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's about building something lasting, creating security for our future family, establishing ourselves in the community." The phrase, "future family," sent another ripple of excitement through the table. Several relatives exchanged meaningful glances, clearly wondering if this house announcement was leading to another, even more significant announcement. "The neighborhood is perfect for raising children," Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the speculation he was encouraging. "The schools are rated among the best in the state, and there's a country club with activities for families." I found myself studying Marcus as he spoke, noticing details I'd never paid attention to before. He had warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly when he smiled, and his voice carried genuine enthusiasm when he talked about their plans. There was something about the way he gestured with his hands, expressive and animated, that reminded me of the children I drew in my illustrations. "What about you, Isabella?" The question came from my cousin David, clearly trying to include me in the conversation. "Any exciting plans for the new year?" Before I could answer, Stephanie jumped in with the kind of timing that suggested she'd been waiting for exactly this opening. "Oh, Isabella's still doing her art thing," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending affection that was somehow worse than outright hostility. "Living the bohemian lifestyle in that tiny apartment, creating her little drawings." The word "little" hit like a slap. Every project I'd worked on, every late night spent perfecting character designs, every manuscript deadline I'd met, reduced to little drawings in front of our entire extended family. "It's not exactly a career path with much growth potential," Stephanie continued, warming to her theme. "I mean, how many children's books can one person possibly illustrate? And the pay is so inconsistent." Some months she probably makes what I make in a day. The accuracy of that statement was what made it so devastating. Stephanie probably did make in a single day what took me weeks to earn. But the implication that this made my work less valuable, less meaningful, less worthy of respect, transformed what should have been a celebration of her success into a referendum on my failures. Different people value different things, I said quietly, trying to maintain my dignity while the entire table watched this public dissection of my life choices. Of course, Stephanie agreed with false understanding. And there's nothing wrong with being content with less. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real responsibility, real deadlines, real consequences. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside her, and I caught him glancing at me with what looked like sympathy. Or perhaps embarrassment at his wife's behavior. It was hard to tell. The art world is very competitive, our father said, clearly trying to defend me without directly contradicting Stephanie. Isabella works very hard on her projects. I'm sure she does, Stephanie replied, her tone suggesting the opposite. But working hard at something that doesn't pay the bills isn't the same as working smart. At some point, you have to ask yourself if your passion is worth being financially dependent on others. The implication that I was financially dependent stung because it contained just enough truth to be humiliating. While I wasn't dependent in the way Stephanie suggested, my income was certainly modest compared to hers. I lived carefully, budgeted meticulously, and yes, there had been times when unexpected expenses had required help from our parents. Isabella's always been the creative one, our mother said, her voice carrying the kind of forced brightness that indicated she was trying to steer the conversation away from dangerous territory. Creativity is wonderful, Stephanie agreed, but it's also a luxury. You can only afford to be creative when someone else is handling the practical matters. Like rent, insurance, retirement planning, building equity. Each word was chosen precisely to highlight the gap between our lifestyles, the difference between someone who owned property in Cherry Hills Village and someone who rented in the Arts District. Stephanie had always been skilled with words, able to construct arguments that sounded reasonable while delivering devastating personal attacks. Some of the most important contributions to society come from artists, said our Aunt Rosa, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Absolutely, Stephanie agreed again, her voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone explaining obvious truths to children. Artists are important. Just like volunteer work is important. But importance doesn't pay mortgages or build retirement funds. The comparison to volunteer work was particularly cutting. Stephanie had managed to reduce my professional career to the level of unpaid community service, something nice people did in their spare time rather than a legitimate way to make a living. Marcus reached for his wine glass, and I noticed his hand trembling slightly. The gesture was so subtle that I doubted anyone else caught it, but something about his body language suggested he was more uncomfortable with this conversation than his silence indicated. The thing is, Stephanie continued, clearly building toward some kind of crescendo, at 29, most people have figured out how to support themselves independently. Most people have built some kind of foundation for their future. The age reference was deliberate. Stephanie was 26, 3 years younger, but she'd managed to achieve in those 3 fewer years what I apparently hadn't accomplished in 29. The math was humiliating in public, and everyone at the table was doing the same calculation. Building a foundation takes different forms for different people, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Does it, though? Stephanie asked, tilting her head with mock curiosity. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like some people build foundations while other people build fantasies. The silence that followed was deafening. 23 family members sat frozen, afraid to move or speak, witnessing what had become a public execution disguised as sisterly concern. I could feel their sympathetic glances, their secondhand embarrassment, their relief that they weren't in my position. Stephanie had achieved exactly what she'd intended. She'd established herself as the successful sister, the one who understood how the real world worked, the one who had made responsible choices and achieved tangible results. And she'd done it by systematically dismantling my life choices in front of our entire extended family. What none of them knew, what Stephanie couldn't have imagined, was that my phone had been buzzing quietly in my purse throughout dinner. Messages from my literary agent, my publisher, and my business manager. Messages that would change everything about this conversation and everything about how my family understood my place in the world. But for now, I sat quietly, cutting another piece of Tres Leches cake, and let my sister's words wash over me like rain on a garden that was about to bloom in ways no one could anticipate. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The aftermath of Stephanie's verbal assault settled over the dinner table like smoke from a house fire. Our cousin Sophia attempted to break the tension by asking about dessert recipes, while Uncle Miguel suddenly became fascinated with the pattern on his napkin. The artificial cheerfulness that followed public humiliation was almost worse than the original attack. I excused myself to help our mother clear the dessert plates, grateful for any excuse to escape the lingering awkwardness. In the kitchen, Carmen Martinez moved with the efficient grace of someone who had spent decades hosting large family gatherings, scraping plates and loading the dishwasher with practiced precision. "Mija," she said softly, not looking up from the sink, "Stephanie doesn't mean to be cruel. She's just proud of what she's accomplished." The gentle deflection was typical of our mother, always trying to smooth over conflicts before they could take root. But the pain in her voice suggested she understood exactly how cruel Stephanie had been, regardless of intention. "I know, Mama," I replied, though we both knew it was more complicated than pride. Stephanie's systematic dismantling of my career hadn't been accidental overflow from success. It had been deliberate, calculated, and thorough. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see the family attempting to restart normal conversation. Abuela Elena was showing photographs from her recent doctor's visits to anyone who would listen, while the teenagers had given up all pretense of engagement and were openly scrolling through their phones. Stephanie held court at her end of the table, describing the interior design plans for her new house with the kind of detailed enthusiasm usually reserved for topics of international importance. "The master bedroom alone is larger than most people's entire apartments," she was saying, her voice carrying clearly into the kitchen. "We're thinking of installing a fireplace and maybe a sitting area by the windows." Marcus nodded along with his wife's descriptions, but I noticed he kept glancing toward the kitchen, as if checking to see how I was handling the ongoing celebration of everything I apparently lacked. His concern seemed genuine, which surprised me. Most of Stephanie's friends and romantic partners had learned to either ignore her casual cruelty or actively participate in it. "The walk-in closet is going to be custom-built," Stephanie continued. "I've been working with this amazing designer who specializes in luxury storage solutions. You wouldn't believe what proper organization can do for your daily routine." Our cousin David made appropriate appreciative sounds, though I suspected he was more interested in his slice of flan than in closet organization. The conversation had that forced quality that emerges when people are trying too hard to move past an uncomfortable moment. I dried my hands on the dish towel and returned to the dining room, hoping my absence had allowed the family to reset into safer conversational territory. Instead, I discovered that Stephanie had somehow managed to expand her house tour into a broader lecture about the importance of financial planning. "The thing people don't realize about real estate investment," she was explaining to our grandfather, who listened with the polite attention of someone humoring a beloved grandchild, "is that it's not just about having a place to live. It's about building generational wealth." Francisco Martinez nodded thoughtfully, though I suspected he was thinking about the small house he and our grandmother had bought 40 years ago for $12,000, now worth nearly 10 times that amount. Thanks to Denver's growth, his understanding of real estate investment was probably more practical than Stephanie's theoretical knowledge, but he was too gracious to point out the irony. "When you own property in the right neighborhoods," Stephanie continued, "you're not just buying a house. You're buying into a community, a lifestyle, a future." The emphasis on right neighborhoods was clearly intended as another subtle dig at my choice to live in the arts district, which, while gentrifying rapidly, still wasn't considered prestigious by Cherry Hills Village standards. Marcus shifted in his chair again, and I caught him checking his phone. The gesture was quick, almost furtive, as if he was hoping to find an excuse to step away from his wife's ongoing performance. When he looked up, his eyes met mine across the table, and he offered a small, apologetic smile that I wasn't sure how to interpret. "Of course," Stephanie added with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes made of glass, "not everyone has the discipline for that kind of long-term thinking. Some people prefer to live in the moment, consequences be damned." The comment was clearly directed at me, another variation on the theme of my supposed financial irresponsibility. But something in Marcus's expression suggested he was as tired of this performance as I was. He reached for his wine glass with the kind of careful control that indicated he was measuring his response. "Different people have different priorities," he said quietly, the first words he'd spoken in nearly 20 minutes. "There's value in pursuing meaningful work, even if the financial rewards aren't immediate." The table fell silent again, but this time the silence carried a different energy. Marcus had just contradicted his wife, gently but unmistakably, in front of her entire extended family. Stephanie's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of anger that crossed her face. "Of course there's value in meaningful work," she agreed, her voice tight with barely controlled irritation. "But meaningful work that doesn't pay the bills isn't sustainable. At some point, reality has to take precedence over dreams. Marcus took a sip of wine before responding, and I noticed his hand was steadier now, as if he'd made some kind of decision. I think the definition of reality depends on what you're trying to achieve, he said, looking directly at Stephanie. Financial security is important, but it's not the only measure of a successful life. The tension between them was suddenly visible to everyone at the table. Our relatives began finding excuses to check on children, refill drinks, or step outside for fresh air. Even our grandparents, who had witnessed decades of family drama, seemed uncomfortable with the undercurrent of marital discord. Stephanie's laugh became sharper, more forced. That's a very romantic way to look at things, Marcus. Very idealistic. The word idealistic carried the same dismissive tone she'd used when describing my career choices. But Marcus didn't back down the way I had. Instead, he set his wine glass down carefully and leaned forward slightly. I think idealism is underrated, he said, his voice calm but firm. Some of the most important advances in human civilization came from people who were willing to prioritize meaning over money. The philosophical disagreement was clearly standing in for a much larger conversation about values, priorities, and the kind of life they wanted to build together. I found myself fascinated by this glimpse into their private dynamic, the revelation that their perfect marriage might not be as harmonious as it appeared. That's true, Stephanie conceded, though her tone suggested she was strategically retreating, rather than genuinely agreeing. But we're not talking about advancing human civilization. We're talking about basic adult responsibilities. Marcus glanced at me again, and this time I was certain I saw something like apology in his expression. Not just for his wife's behavior, but for his own failure to intervene more decisively earlier in the evening. Basic adult responsibilities include treating family members with respect, he said quietly, and the words hung in the air like a challenge. Stephanie's face flushed red beneath her foundation. Marcus had just called her out for her treatment of me, publicly and unambiguously. The golden couple's facade was cracking in real time, revealing tensions that none of us had suspected. I've always been respectful, Stephanie protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I've simply been honest about the practical realities of career choices. Honest about your perspective on career choices, Marcus corrected. But perspective isn't the same as objective reality. The distinction was subtle but devastating. Marcus was suggesting that Stephanie's dismissal of my work said more about her limitations than mine. The implication was clear to everyone at the table, including Stephanie herself. Our father cleared his throat uncomfortably, clearly wanting to redirect the conversation before it escalated further. Perhaps we should talk about something else, he suggested gently, but Stephanie seemed incapable of letting the moment pass. Her need to reassert control over the narrative was stronger than her awareness of the growing discomfort around the table. Fine, she said, her voice brittle with forced cheerfulness. Let's talk about something else. Marcus, why don't you tell everyone about the Henderson merger? I'm sure they'd find it fascinating. The request was clearly intended to showcase Marcus's professional achievements, to re-establish their status as the successful couple after his unexpected criticism of her behavior. But Marcus seemed reluctant to comply with what was obviously a scripted performance. I don't think everyone wants to hear about commercial real estate transactions, he said diplomatically. Of course they do, Stephanie insisted, her smile becoming more strained. It's not every day you get to hear from someone who handles $100 million deals. The number was impressive, and I could see several relatives perk up with genuine interest. Marcus had apparently been more successful than even I had realized, which made his defense of meaningful work over financial reward even more significant. The Henderson deal was complex, Marcus said reluctantly, but I'm not sure it's appropriate dinner conversation. His unwillingness to perform on command was clearly frustrating Stephanie, who had expected him to help re-establish their superiority. After his moment of unexpected rebellion, the dynamic between them was becoming increasingly uncomfortable to witness. Marcus is being modest, Stephanie announced to the table. The deal he structured saved Henderson Corporation over $40 million in tax implications alone. The partners at his firm called it brilliant. Marcus looked genuinely embarrassed by the praise, which only made him more appealing. There was something refreshing about someone who had achieved significant professional success without the need to broadcast it constantly. It was good work, he acknowledged simply. But ultimately, it's just moving money around. It doesn't create anything new or help anyone who actually needs help. The comment was clearly directed at his wife, another subtle criticism of the values system that prioritized wealth accumulation over social contribution. Stephanie's face was becoming increasingly flushed as her husband continued to contradict the worldview she'd been promoting all evening. Moving money around efficiently is important, she said defensively. Economic growth depends on capital allocation. Your work creates jobs, enables development projects, facilitates growth. Marcus shrugged, unconvinced by his own importance. Maybe. But at the end of the day, I help rich people get richer. It's not exactly saving the world. The conversation had taken a fascinating turn. Marcus, who I'd assumed was another status-obsessed professional, was revealing himself to be someone who questioned the value of his own highly compensated work. Meanwhile, Stephanie, who had spent the evening lecturing about practical career choices, was now defending the societal importance of investment banking. "Your work is valuable," our grandfather interjected, clearly trying to support his granddaughter's husband. "We need people who understand finance, who can make the system work efficiently." "Thank you, Francisco," Marcus replied respectfully. "But I think there's a difference between work that's valuable to the economy and work that's valuable to human beings. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't." The philosophical distinction was clearly beyond what Marcus usually discussed at family gatherings. But his willingness to engage in serious conversation made him seem more substantial than the successful but shallow husband I'd assumed him to be. Stephanie was clearly reaching the limits of her patience with this unexpected turn in the conversation. Her evening of public triumph was being undermined by her own husband's inconvenient values. "Well," she said with forced lightness, "I suppose we can agree to disagree about the relative importance of different types of work." But Marcus wasn't ready to let the moment pass with polite disagreement. "Actually," he said, turning to look at me directly, "I've always been curious about Isabella's illustration work. Creating stories for children seems like it would be incredibly fulfilling." The direct attention caught me off guard. For most of the evening, I'd been the object of discussion rather than a participant in it. Having Marcus address me as an equal, with genuine curiosity about my work, felt like stepping into sunlight after hours in shadow. "It can be," I said carefully, uncertain how much detail was appropriate given the family audience and the obvious tension between Marcus and Stephanie. "What kind of stories do you usually illustrate?" he asked, leaning forward slightly with what appeared to be genuine interest. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my purse with another message. The timing was becoming impossible to ignore, and I could feel the weight of whatever news was waiting for me. But the opportunity to have an adult conversation about my work, especially with someone who seemed genuinely curious, was too rare to pass up. "It varies," I said, trying to focus on Marcus's question rather than the persistent buzzing. "Sometimes it's educational content, sometimes fantasy adventures. The project I just finished was about ocean conservation, trying to help kids understand environmental issues through storytelling." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like exactly the kind of work that creates real value. Teaching children to care about the environment could have more long-term impact than any financial transaction." The comment was clearly another indirect criticism of his own work, and by extension, the value system Stephanie had been promoting. But it was also a genuine validation of my career choices, the first I'd received from anyone at the table all evening. Stephanie's control over the conversation was slipping away entirely, and I could see her struggling to find a way back to familiar territory where she held the advantage. Her perfect evening of displaying superior life choices was being sabotaged by her own husband's inconvenient integrity. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man she'd married for his success and status was revealing himself to be someone who questioned the very foundations of that success. And he was doing it while defending the sister she'd spent the evening publicly dismissing. My phone buzzed again, more insistently this time, and I realized I couldn't ignore whatever news was waiting much longer. But first, I wanted to see how this unexpected conversation would resolve itself, how Stephanie would handle her husband's growing rebellion against the script she'd written for their perfect life. The persistent buzzing from my purse had become impossible to ignore. Each vibration felt like a countdown timer, marking moments until something significant would shift the trajectory of this already strained evening. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing to check an urgent message, though several family members barely acknowledged my departure. They were too absorbed in watching the subtle but unmistakable tension between Stephanie and Marcus unfold in real time. In the quiet hallway leading to our parents' guest bathroom, I finally retrieved my phone. The screen showed 17 missed calls and 23 unread messages, all from numbers I recognized as central to my professional life. My literary agent, my publisher, my business manager, and several others whose names made my pulse quicken. With anticipation mixed with anxiety, the first message was from Sarah Chen. My literary agent, sent just 2 hours earlier. "Isabella, urgent news. Call me immediately. Don't talk to anyone else until we speak." The second was from David Morrison at Enchanted Forest Publishing. "Need to discuss major development regarding Ocean Guardian series. This changes everything. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through the remaining messages, each one escalating in urgency and excitement. Words like unprecedented, bidding war, international rights, and life-changing appeared repeatedly, creating a puzzle I couldn't quite piece together from fragments. The final message, sent just minutes ago, was from my business manager. Jennifer Walsh, Isabella, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime are all bidding for your Ocean Guardians series. We need to talk strategy immediately. This is bigger than anything we've handled before. I stared at the screen, reading Jennifer's message 3 times before. The words fully registered. Streaming services were bidding for my work. Not just one service, but 3 of the most powerful entertainment companies in the world were apparently competing for the rights to adapt my children's book series into animated content. My phone rang in my hands, startling me back to the present moment. Sarah Chen's number flashed on the screen, and I answered with shaking fingers. Isabella, thank God. Sarah's voice was breathless with excitement. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you since 4 o'clock. I'm at my family's Christmas dinner, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah, what's happening? The messages are all talking about bidding wars and streaming rights. Sit down, Sarah commanded. Actually, never mind, there probably isn't time to sit down. Isabella, your Ocean Guardians series has exploded. That environmental documentary that featured your book last month? It went viral on social media 2 days ago. Suddenly everyone is talking about climate change education for children, and your series is being cited as the gold standard. I leaned against the hallway wall, trying to process information that seemed too large to fit inside my understanding of my own career. But it's just a children's book series about ocean conservation. It's not just anything anymore, Sarah continued, her voice rising with excitement. Greta Thunberg shared a video of herself reading your book to a group of children in Sweden. That video has been viewed 12 million times. 12 million, Isabella. The number seemed fictional, impossible. Greta Thunberg, the international climate activist, had somehow discovered my work and shared it with the world. The same work that Stephanie had dismissed as little drawings just hours earlier. The environmental education market has exploded overnight, Sarah explained. Parents everywhere are looking for content that teaches kids about climate issues without scaring them, and your approach of using ocean animals as storytellers is being called revolutionary. From the dining room, I could hear the murmur of continued conversation, though the voices seemed to be coming from a different universe than the one I was currently inhabiting. My family was still debating the relative merits of different career paths while I stood in a hallway learning that my career had just transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. How much are they offering? I asked, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. Sarah paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. The initial offers are in the mid-7 figures just for the streaming rights. That's before we negotiate merchandising, international distribution, or sequel commitments. 7 figures. My sister had spent the evening bragging about her house purchase and 6-figure salary while I was apparently sitting on a deal worth millions of dollars. The irony was so complete it felt like fiction. Isabella, are you still there? Sarah's voice brought me back to the conversation. I'm here, I said, though I felt like I was floating somewhere above my physical body, watching this conversation happen to someone else. There's more, Sarah continued. HarperCollins wants to expand the series into educational curriculum for schools. The Smithsonian is interested in partnering on exhibition content. And there's talk of a documentary series following you as you develop the next books. Each piece of information felt like another layer of unreality. The children's book illustrator who lived in a modest apartment and worried about monthly expenses was apparently about to become a multimedia content creator with international reach and influence. Sarah, I need to ask you something, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. How long have you known this was possible? When did you realize the series had this kind of potential? Honestly? I've known for months that your work was special. The way you combine scientific accuracy with emotional storytelling, the sophisticated environmental themes presented in accessible language, the artistic quality of your illustrations. It was always professional-level work with commercial potential. But you never told me it could be this big. Sarah laughed, a sound filled with genuine affection. Isabella, I've been your agent for 3 years. You've always been more focused on the message than the money. I knew if I started talking about multimedia deals and international rights, you'd get overwhelmed and second-guess your artistic choices. She was right. I had always been suspicious of commercial success, worried that focusing on financial potential would compromise the integrity of my work. But the success was happening anyway, despite my deliberate ignorance of market forces. What happens now? I asked. Now we schedule meetings with all 3 streaming services and see who's willing to give you the most creative control along with the best financial terms. And Isabella? You're going to need to make some decisions about representation. This level of success requires a different kind of professional support. Through the hallway, I could hear my family's conversation continuing, though the tone had shifted. Stephanie's voice was notably absent from the discussion, while Marcus seemed to be engaging our grandfather in conversation about something that was making Francisco laugh. I need to go back to dinner, I said. But Sarah, please don't announce anything yet. I need to process this privately before it becomes public knowledge. Of course. But Isabella? Don't wait too long. These opportunities move fast, and we want to strike while the environmental education market is hot. I ended the call and stood in the hallway for several minutes, trying to reconcile the person I'd been an hour ago with the person I apparently was now. The children's book illustrator who lived paycheck to paycheck had somehow become someone that major corporations wanted to partner with, someone whose work was being shared by international celebrities, someone whose financial future had just been completely transformed. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from my editor at Enchanted Forest Publishing. Isabella, emergency board meeting tomorrow to discuss expansion strategy for Ocean Guardians franchise. Can you be in New York by noon? A franchise. My little series about ocean conservation had become a franchise with expansion strategies and board meetings. The business terminology felt foreign and exciting and terrifying all at once. I walked back toward the dining room, pausing at the threshold to observe my family before rejoining them. The dynamic had shifted noticeably in my absence. Stephanie sat quietly at her end of the table, no longer holding court, while Marcus had somehow moved closer to our parents and was showing them something on his phone. Isabella creates these incredible detailed backgrounds, I heard him saying as I approached. The way she captures underwater environments, you can almost feel the water moving. It took me a moment to realize he was describing my artwork to our parents, speaking about my illustrations with the kind of technical appreciation usually reserved for fine art rather than children's books. He had apparently looked up my work online and was sharing it with the family. These are beautiful, Mija, our mother said, looking at Marcus's phone screen with obvious pride. I had no idea the pictures were so sophisticated. Our father leaned over to see the images, his face lighting up with surprise and delight. Isabella, why didn't you show us these before? This is real artwork. The phrase real artwork hit me with unexpected emotional force. For years, I downplayed my professional achievements, partly from modesty and partly from the kind of imposter syndrome that makes artists question the legitimacy of their own success. But seeing my parents' genuine amazement at the quality of my work made me realize how much I'd been minimizing my own accomplishments. The detail in this coral reef scene is incredible, Marcus continued, zooming in on one of my illustrations. You can see individual fish species, different types of coral, even the way light filters through the water at different depths. Stephanie watched this impromptu art appreciation session with obvious discomfort. Her husband was giving me the kind of detailed, professional recognition she'd been denying me all evening. And he was doing it with enthusiasm that made her earlier dismissals seem petty and uninformed. Marcus has a good eye for art, said our Aunt Rosa, clearly trying to include Stephanie in the positive conversation about my work. Yes, Stephanie agreed tightly. Marcus appreciates many things. The comment carried an edge that suggested deeper marital tensions than the philosophical disagreements we'd witnessed earlier. There was something in her tone that hinted at ongoing conflicts about values, priorities, and the kind of life they wanted to build together. Marcus seemed oblivious to his wife's discomfort, too absorbed in explaining the technical aspects of my illustrations to our relatives. Look at how she uses color to show different ocean depths, he said, swiping through several images. The way the blues shift from bright aqua in shallow water to deep navy in the depths, it's like a masterclass in marine environment representation. His artistic vocabulary surprised me. Most people looked at my work and saw cute pictures of fish. Marcus was seeing and describing the careful research, color theory, and technical skill that went into creating scientifically accurate underwater environments. How do you know so much about art? Asked our cousin David, clearly impressed by Marcus's detailed analysis. Marcus looked up from the phone, seeming surprised by the question. I have a fine arts degree, he said simply. I was actually an art major before I went to business school. The revelation hit the table like a small explosion. Marcus, the successful investment banker with the expensive suits and seven-figure house, had originally been an artist. Stephanie's perfect husband, the poster child for choosing profit over passion, had apparently made exactly the kind of career compromise she'd been criticizing me for avoiding. You were an art major? Our grandmother asked with obvious delight. What kind of art did you study? Painting, mostly, Marcus replied, his voice taking on a wistful quality. Abstract expressionism, some landscape work. I had a studio space. In college, spent most of my free time covered in oil paint. Stephanie's face had gone completely pale. Her husband, who she'd been using as evidence of the superiority of practical career choices, was revealing himself to have been exactly the kind of dreamy, impractical artist she'd been mocking all evening. "What made you switch to business?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Marcus glanced at Stephanie before responding, and the look that passed between them carried years of unspoken history. Family pressure, mostly. My parents convinced me that art wasn't a viable career path. They said I could always paint as a hobby, but I needed a profession that would provide financial security. The parallel to my own family's concerns was obvious, but the difference in our responses revealed everything about the choices we'd made and the lives we'd built. Marcus had abandoned his artistic dreams for practical success, while I had pursued mine despite practical concerns. "Do you still paint?" our mother asked gently. Marcus shook his head, and I could see real sadness in his expression. "I haven't touched a paintbrush in 8 years. Between work and other obligations, there never seems to be time." The phrase, other obligations, clearly referred to the lifestyle he and Stephanie had built, the house payments and country club memberships and social expectations that required his continued success in investment banking. He had traded his artistic soul for financial security, and the cost was becoming visible to everyone at the table. "That's such a shame," said our Aunt Rosa. "Artistic talent is a gift. It seems wrong to waste it." The comment was clearly directed at Marcus, but I could see Stephanie taking it as another indirect criticism of the value system she'd been promoting. Her evening of triumph was crumbling in ways she couldn't have anticipated, undermined by revelations about her own husband's suppressed dreams and abandoned passions. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see another message from my business manager, Isabella. "Universal Studios just entered the bidding. This is unprecedented for a children's book series. We need to schedule a strategy session immediately." Universal Studios, one of the largest entertainment companies in the world, was apparently competing for the rights to my work. The same work that hours earlier had been dismissed as a hobby, a phase, an extended form of volunteering. I looked around the table at my family, still processing Marcus's revelation about his artistic background, still trying to understand how the successful investment banker had once been a painter. None of them knew that while they were discovering his hidden creative past, I was learning about my suddenly explosive creative future. The irony was becoming too perfect to believe. Stephanie had spent the evening comparing my artistic career unfavorably to Marcus's business success, not knowing that Marcus regretted abandoning art for business, or that my artistic career was about to surpass anything Marcus had achieved in finance. But the most significant irony was still to come. As I sat there holding my phone full of life-changing messages, I had no idea that Marcus was about to make a request that would transform not just my career prospects, but my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my sister's marriage and my own place in the family dynamic. The revelation about Marcus's artistic background had transformed the dinner table atmosphere completely. Our relatives peppered him with questions about his college art classes, his favorite painters, and whether he missed the creative work. With each answer, Stephanie's discomfort became more visible, her perfectly composed facade cracking under the weight of discoveries that contradicted everything she'd built their public image around. I found myself studying Marcus with new eyes, seeing past the expensive suit and polished exterior to glimpse the artist he'd once been. There was something in the way his hands moved when he described color theory, a muscle memory of mixing paints and creating textures that years of financial spreadsheets hadn't completely erased. "I remember one painting I did senior year," Marcus was saying, his voice taking on an animated quality I'd never heard before. "It was this massive canvas, maybe 6 feet wide, trying to capture the way morning light hits the Rocky Mountains after a snowstorm. I must have worked on it for 3 months, layering blues and whites and these tiny hints of pink." Our grandfather Francisco leaned forward with obvious interest. "What happened to that painting?" Marcus's expression grew wistful. "My parents made me throw it away when I graduated. They said it was time to focus on the future instead of dwelling on impractical dreams." The casual cruelty of that statement hit everyone at the table. The idea of parents forcing their child to destroy months of creative work felt like vandalism of the soul. I could see our own parents exchanging glances, perhaps remembering their own concerns about my career choices and feeling grateful they'd never demanded such destruction. "That's heartbreaking," our Aunt Rosa said softly. "Art is meant to be preserved, not destroyed." "It was a long time ago," Marcus replied, though the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. "I've learned to focus on more practical matters." "Stephanie." had been unusually quiet throughout this conversation, her earlier dominance of the evening completely evaporated. But something in Marcus's tone seemed to trigger a defensive response. "Marcus is being modest about his success," she interjected, her voice carrying a forced brightness. "Not everyone gets to pursue their college hobbies professionally. Some of us have to grow up and take on real responsibilities." The comment was clearly intended to re-establish the narrative she'd been promoting all evening, but it backfired spectacularly. Instead of supporting her husband, she just dismissed his deepest passion as a college hobby and implied that pursuing art was incompatible with maturity. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and I could see something shift in his expression. The easy camaraderie he'd been sharing with our family was replaced by something cooler, more guarded. "Some hobbies turn out to be more important than we realize," he said quietly, and the words carried an edge that made Stephanie's face flush with embarrassment. Our cousin David, who had been following this exchange with obvious fascination, chose that moment to ask the question that would change everything. "Marcus, since you have such a good eye for art, what do you think about Isabella's career prospects? I mean, could someone actually make a living doing what she does?" The question was innocent enough, posed by a recent college graduate still figuring out his own professional path. But it created an opening for Marcus to address directly the dismissive attitude his wife had been displaying all evening. Marcus looked at me across the table, and something in his expression suggested he was about to say more than anyone expected. "Actually," he began, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, "I think Isabella is positioned at the forefront of one of the fastest-growing markets in publishing and entertainment." The statement was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Stephanie had been saying, that the table fell completely silent. Even the teenagers looked up from their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. "What do you mean?" asked our father, clearly intrigued by Marcus's confident tone. Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be financial news articles. "Environmental education for children is exploding right now. There's this massive cultural shift happening, where parents are looking for content that teaches kids about climate change without terrifying them." He turned his phone toward the table, showing a headline I couldn't quite read from my position. "The children's environmental education market has grown by 400% in the last 2 years. Publishers are scrambling to find quality content creators who can address these topics effectively." Stephanie's face had gone completely pale. Her husband, the investment banker she'd been using as evidence of superior career choices, was now defending the exact type of work she'd been dismissing as impractical. "Isabella's approach is particularly smart," Marcus continued, clearly warming to his analysis. "She's created characters that kids can connect with emotionally while learning about complex environmental issues. That combination of educational value and entertainment appeal is exactly what the market is demanding." Our mother beamed with pride, finally hearing someone articulate the professional value of my work in terms that made business sense. "I always knew Isabella was talented, but I didn't realize there was such demand for this type of art." "The demand is incredible," Marcus said, scrolling through more articles on his phone. "And it's not just books anymore. Streaming services are investing billions in children's educational content. Animation studios are looking for properties they can develop into series. There's merchandising potential, curriculum licensing, international distribution." Each industry term he mentioned felt like another piece of validation, confirmation that my work existed in a legitimate professional ecosystem that my family had never understood. But more than that, Marcus's analysis was revealing knowledge about my specific market that suggested he'd been researching children's publishing far more extensively than casual interest would explain. "How do you know so much about the children's book industry?" I asked, genuinely curious about the depth of his knowledge. Marcus paused, his phone still in his hands, and something in his expression suggested I'd asked exactly the right question. He glanced at Stephanie, who was watching him with obvious anxiety, as if she suspected what he might be about to reveal. "I've been following your career," he said simply, and the admission sent a ripple of surprise through the family. "Following my career?" I repeated, not sure I'd heard correctly. Marcus nodded, his expression serious now. "For about 2 years, actually. Ever since Stephanie first showed me your work." Stephanie's eyes widened in what looked like panic. "Marcus, I don't think this is the right time to." "She didn't show it to me to be supportive," Marcus continued, ignoring his wife's attempt at interruption. "She showed it to me as an example of what happens when talented people make impractical career choices." The revelation was devastating in its honesty. Stephanie had been using my work as a cautionary tale in her own marriage, proof that following artistic dreams led to financial struggle and professional irrelevance. "But when I actually looked at your illustrations," Marcus said, turning to address me directly, I realized Stephanie was completely wrong about their quality and their commercial potential. Our relatives were watching this exchange with the fascination of people witnessing a marriage implode in real time. The perfect couple's private disagreements were spilling into public view, revealing fundamental differences in values and judgment. I started researching the children's book market, Marcus continued, partly out of curiosity and partly because I was frustrated with how dismissive Stephanie was being about genuinely impressive work. Stephanie's face was now burning with humiliation. Her husband was publicly contradicting her assessment of my career while revealing that he'd been secretly researching my industry for years. "Marcus, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't necessary." But Marcus seemed determined to finish what he'd started. "I've been tracking Isabella's publications, following industry trends, monitoring the growth in environmental education markets. And what I discovered is that someone with her skill set and artistic vision is positioned for exactly the kind of breakthrough that's happening in children's media right now." The analysis was so thorough, so professionally informed, that it carried the weight of genuine expertise rather than family politeness. Marcus had apparently conducted the kind of market research that publishers pay consultants thousands of dollars to produce. The streaming services are desperate for content creators who can combine educational value with artistic excellence, he said, pulling up what appeared to be industry reports on his phone. Isabella's Ocean Guardians series is exactly what they're looking for. The mention of my specific series made me freeze. Marcus not only knew my work in general terms, he was familiar with my current projects by name. The level of attention he'd been paying to my career was far beyond casual interest or even supportive family research. "How do you know about Ocean Guardians?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Marcus looked directly at me, and I could see something like apology in his expression. "I've been following the industry buzz about your series for months. The environmental education community has been talking about it as potentially groundbreaking work." The word groundbreaking hung in the air, like a challenge to everything Stephanie had said about my career prospects. Her husband, the financial expert she'd been citing as authority on practical success, was describing my work in terms usually reserved for major commercial breakthroughs. "That's ridiculous," Stephanie said, her voice rising with desperation. "It's a children's book about fish. How could that possibly be groundbreaking?" Marcus turned to look at his wife with an expression I couldn't quite identify. Disappointment, perhaps, or frustration with her willful ignorance about something he clearly found significant. "It's not just about fish, Stephanie. It's about teaching children to understand complex ecological relationships through storytelling. It's about making environmental science accessible to young minds while respecting their intelligence and emotional capacity." The explanation was so articulate, so clearly informed by genuine understanding of my work's goals and methods, that I felt a surge of gratitude toward this man I'd barely known an hour ago. "The illustrations alone represent months of research into marine biology," Marcus continued. "Every creature is scientifically accurate, every ecosystem is properly represented. It's the kind of meticulous attention to detail that separates professional work from amateur attempts." Our grandfather Francisco nodded approvingly. "That kind of thoroughness is impressive in any field." "And commercially," Marcus added, "that attention to scientific accuracy makes the work valuable for educational licensing. Schools, museums, environmental organizations, they're all looking for content they can trust to be both engaging and factually correct." Each point he made was revealing not just knowledge about my work, but genuine appreciation for the creative and professional choices I'd made. Someone had been paying attention to my career with the kind of detailed understanding I'd never expected to receive from my own family, let alone from my sister's husband. "Marcus," I said carefully, "why have you been researching my work so extensively?" The question created another moment of charged silence around the table. Everyone seemed to sense that his answer would reveal something significant about the dynamics we'd been witnessing all evening. Marcus set down his phone and looked at me with complete directness. "Because I've been trying to figure out if there was a way to invest in your career." The statement hit the table like a physical blow. Stephanie gasped audibly, our parents exchanged stunned glances, and I felt my understanding of the entire evening shift once again. "Invest in my career?" I repeated, not sure I'd understood correctly. "I've been researching opportunities to provide funding for promising artists," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the obvious shock his words were causing. "The kind of grants or partnerships that could allow talented creators to focus on their work without worrying about financial survival." Stephanie was staring at her husband with an expression of complete betrayal. "You never told me about any investment research." "Because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it," Marcus replied. Simply. "You've made your opinion about the value of artistic careers very clear." The marital tension was now undeniable, playing out in front of our entire extended family. But more than that, Marcus was revealing that he'd been secretly planning to support exactly the kind of work Stephanie had been publicly dismissing. I was waiting for the right opportunity, Marcus continued, turning back to me. Waiting to see if Isabella's work would gain the kind of recognition that would justify a significant investment. My phone, which had been buzzing intermittently throughout dinner, suddenly rang with an urgency that cut through the conversation. Sarah Chen's number flashed on the screen, and I realized I couldn't ignore this call any longer. I need to take this, I said, standing from the table with shaking hands. It's my literary agent. As I walked toward the kitchen to answer the call, I could hear Marcus saying to Stephanie, I think that opportunity might be presenting itself right now. But what none of them knew, what I was about to discover from Sarah's call, was that the opportunity Marcus had been researching and waiting for had already arrived in ways that would transform not just my career, but everyone's understanding of what was possible when artistic vision met commercial success. The phone call I was about to take would reveal that while Marcus had been secretly planning to invest in my future, entertainment companies around the world had been making plans of their own. Plans that would make his potential investment seem modest by comparison, and plans that would turn Stephanie's evening of superiority into the most public miscalculation of her life. The kitchen felt like a sanctuary compared to the tension-filled dining room I'd just escaped. I answered Sarah's call with trembling fingers, my back pressed against the refrigerator as I tried to steady myself for whatever news was about to change my life. Isabella, please tell me you're somewhere private. Sarah's voice was electric with barely contained excitement. I'm in my parents' kitchen. What's happening, Sarah? Your messages mentioned bidding wars and Netflix, but I couldn't process everything while sitting with my family. Sit down, Sarah commanded. Actually, no, stay standing. You're going to want to be standing for this. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see my family still gathered around the dining table, their animated conversation suggesting that Marcus's revelation about investing in artistic careers had sparked intense discussion. Stephanie sat rigid in her chair, her designer dress looking somehow less perfect than it had hours earlier. The Ocean Guardians viral moment has triggered something unprecedented, Sarah began. When Greta Thunberg shared that video, it wasn't just social media buzz. It caught the attention of development executives at every major streaming platform simultaneously. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to focus on Sarah's words while watching Marcus gesture emphatically to our father, apparently explaining something about market trends and creative investments. Netflix was the first to reach out, around noon today. They want to develop Ocean Guardians into an animated series, but not just any series. They're talking about a flagship environmental education program with you as executive producer and creative director. The titles felt foreign and impossibly prestigious. Executive producer. Creative director. These were positions held by people with decades of industry experience, not children's book illustrators working from cramped apartments. Sarah, I don't understand. I've never worked in television. I don't know anything about animation production or series development. You don't need to know those things yet, Sarah said, her voice warm with confidence. You know storytelling, character development, and environmental science. The technical aspects can be learned or delegated. What you have can't be taught. From the dining room, I heard Stephanie's voice rising sharply, though I couldn't make out the specific words. The conversation Marcus had started about artistic investments was clearly not going the way she'd hoped. How much are they offering? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Sarah paused, and I could hear papers rustling. The Netflix initial offer is $2.7 million for the first season, with options for 4 additional seasons at escalating rates. Plus back-end participation in merchandising and international licensing. The number hit me like a physical force. $2.7 million. For work based on the children's books Stephanie had dismissed as hobby-level projects just hours earlier. Sarah, did you just say $2.7 million? That's just Netflix's opening offer, Sarah continued, apparently unfazed by numbers that seemed to exist in a different universe from my current reality. Disney Plus came in at $3.1 million, but with more restrictive creative control terms. Amazon Prime's offer is the most interesting though. My legs felt unsteady, and I leaned more heavily against the refrigerator. What did Amazon offer? $4.5 million for the first season, plus development deals for 3 additional environmental education series based on concepts you haven't even created yet. They want to build an entire children's environmental programming block around your work. I stared at the kitchen wall, trying to process information that seemed too large to fit inside my understanding of my own career. Amazon Prime wanted to create an entire programming block around work I hadn't even imagined yet. Isabella, Are you still there? I'm here, I managed, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. Sarah, this is insane. Yesterday I was worried about whether I could afford to replace my laptop. Yesterday you were a talented illustrator with a small but dedicated following. Today you're a content creator with proven viral potential and demonstrated appeal to the exact demographic that streaming services are desperately trying to reach. Through the doorway, I watched Marcus showing something on his phone to our grandfather, their conversation animated and clearly positive. Whatever research he'd been conducting about my career prospects was apparently being validated in real time. There's more, Sarah said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. This morning I got calls from 3 literary agencies wanting to represent you for different markets. One specializes in educational content licensing, one handles celebrity book deals, and one focuses on international rights management. Celebrity book deals. The phrase seemed to apply to someone else entirely, not to the woman standing barefoot in her parents' kitchen wearing a dress she'd bought on clearance 6 months ago. Sarah, I already have you as my agent. For traditional publishing, yes. But Isabella, what's happening to your career right now is beyond traditional publishing. You're about to become a multimedia brand. You need a team of specialists to handle the different revenue streams. Revenue streams. Multimedia brand. The business terminology felt like a foreign language, though I was apparently becoming fluent whether I wanted to or not. What about Harper Collins? I asked, remembering one of the many messages I'd received. You mentioned educational curriculum development. HarperCollins is offering $1.8 million for exclusive rights to develop your Ocean Guardians content into textbooks, workbooks, and digital learning platforms for grades K through 8. They want to partner with the National Geographic Society for Credibility and the Smithsonian for exhibition tie-ins. Each partnership Sarah mentioned added another layer of unreality to the conversation. National Geographic. The Smithsonian. These were institutions I'd admired from a distance, never imagining I might collaborate with them professionally. The timeline is aggressive, Sarah continued. Everyone wants to capitalize on the viral momentum before it fades. Netflix needs a decision by Friday so they can announce the project at their next earnings call. Disney Plus wants to include your series in their Earth Day programming announcement next week. Friday was 3 days away. I was apparently expected to make decisions worth millions of dollars within 72 hours, decisions that would determine the direction of my career for years to come. Sarah, I need to ask you something honestly. Do you think I'm qualified for this level of responsibility? Executive producing a television series, developing educational curriculum, becoming a multimedia brand? 6 months ago I was illustrating picture books. Sarah's laugh was warm and reassuring. Isabella, 6 months ago you were illustrating picture books that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of marine biology, complex character development, and narrative structures that appeal to both children and adults. The only thing that's changed is that the world has noticed what was always there. From the dining room, I heard chairs scraping against the floor and the sound of people moving around. The family discussion about Marcus's investment interests was apparently reaching some kind of conclusion. I need time to think about all of this, I said. Can I call you back in an hour? Of course. But Isabella, don't overthink this. Sometimes the universe presents opportunities that are too perfect to second guess. Your work has found its moment. And moments like this don't wait for us to feel ready. I ended the call and stood in the kitchen for several minutes, trying to reconcile the person I'd been that morning with the person I apparently was now. The children's book illustrator who, worried about monthly expenses, had somehow become someone that major corporations wanted to build programming blocks around. My phone immediately buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh, my business manager. Isabella, urgent update. Universal Pictures wants to discuss feature film rights. Pixar is interested in collaboration opportunities. We need to schedule a strategy meeting ASAP. Universal Pictures. Pixar. Each name that appeared in my messages represented a level of professional validation I'd never allowed myself to imagine. The animation studios that created movies I'd watched and admired were apparently interested in working with me. I walked slowly back toward the dining room, my phone heavy with messages that contained information capable of changing not just my financial future, but my family's entire understanding of what was possible when artistic vision met commercial opportunity. As I approached the table, I could see that the conversation had shifted dramatically in my absence. Marcus was no longer explaining his investment research to interested relatives. Instead, he was facing Stephanie across the table in what appeared to be an intense private discussion, their voices low but their body language suggesting serious disagreement. I can't believe you've been planning this behind my back, Stephanie was saying, her voice tight with controlled anger. researching investments in artistic careers while telling me how important it is to focus on practical financial planning. Marcus's response was calm but firm. I've been researching opportunities to support meaningful work while you've been dismissing meaningful work. Those aren't contradictory positions, Stephanie. They're opposite positions. The philosophical divide between them was now complete and public. Marcus had revealed himself to be someone who valued artistic contribution and wanted to support creative careers, while Stephanie remained committed to the belief that practical success required abandoning artistic dreams. Meaningful work doesn't pay for houses in Cherry Hills Village, Stephanie said, gesturing toward herself as evidence of the lifestyle that practical career choices could provide. Maybe the question isn't whether meaningful work can pay for expensive houses, Marcus replied quietly. Maybe the question is whether expensive houses are worth sacrificing meaningful work. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything Stephanie had built her identity around. Her husband was suggesting that their entire lifestyle, their expensive home and luxury purchases and exclusive neighborhood, might be less valuable than the artistic satisfaction he'd given up to afford them, but as I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding my phone full of messages about million-dollar offers and major studio interest, I realized that Marcus's philosophical question was about to become irrelevant, because I was about to prove that meaningful work and financial success weren't mutually exclusive after all. The only question was whether my family was ready to learn just how spectacularly wrong their assumptions about artistic careers had been. I returned to the dining room to find the atmosphere completely transformed. The earlier warmth of family celebration had been replaced by palpable tension, with relatives stealing uncomfortable glances at Stephanie and Marcus while pretending to focus on their coffee cups. The golden couple's facade had cracked beyond repair, revealing fundamental disagreements that went far deeper than career philosophy. "Everything all right, Mija?" our mother asked as I slid back into my seat, her maternal instincts clearly picking up on the shift in family dynamics. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "I think it's time I shared some news with everyone." The table fell silent, all attention turning to me. Stephanie looked up from her intense staring contest with Marcus, perhaps hoping for a distraction from their public disagreement. But what I was about to reveal would make their marital tension seem insignificant by comparison. "That phone call was from my literary agent," I began, looking around the table at faces that held various expressions of polite interest mixed with concern about the evening's emotional turbulence. Marcus leaned forward slightly, and something in his expression suggested he suspected this announcement might be more significant than casual family updates about work projects. "She was calling to tell me about some opportunities that have developed around my Ocean Guardians series," I continued, my voice growing stronger as I spoke. "It seems that the environmental education market Marcus was describing has taken a very specific interest in my work." Stephanie's eyebrows rose skeptically. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked, though her tone suggested she expected whatever I was about to describe would pale in comparison to the house purchase and career achievements she'd been celebrating all evening. I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would fundamentally alter how my family understood my place in the world. Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime are all bidding for the rights to develop Ocean Guardians into animated television series. The silence that followed was deafening. "Our grandfather." Francisco blinked several times, as if trying to process information that didn't quite compute. Our Aunt Rosa set down her coffee cup with unusual care, while the teenagers suddenly looked up from their phones with genuine interest. "Bidding," our father repeated slowly. "You mean like competing against each other?" "Three-way bidding war," I confirmed, watching as understanding began to dawn on various faces around the table. "Amazon's current offer is $4.5 million for the first season alone, plus development deals for additional series." The number hit the table like a small explosion. Several relatives gasped audibly, while others sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the modest children's book illustrator they thought they knew with someone that major corporations were willing to pay millions to work with. Stephanie's face went completely white. $4.5 million, she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's just one offer," I continued, finding it easier to share the news now that I'd started. "Universal Pictures wants to discuss feature film rights. Pixar is interested in collaboration opportunities. HarperCollins is offering almost $2 million for educational curriculum development." Each new piece of information sent another wave of shock through my family. The career that had been dismissed as impractical hobby work just hours earlier was being revealed as a multimedia empire worth tens of millions of dollars in potential revenue. Marcus was staring at me with an expression of amazement mixed with something that looked like vindication. His research into my career prospects had apparently been more accurate than even he had imagined. Isabella, our mother said, her voice filled with wonder, are you telling us that companies are offering you millions of dollars for your drawings? 4. My storytelling, my character development, my environmental science research, and yes, my illustrations, I replied, finally able to articulate the full scope of what my work encompassed. They're offering millions of dollars for content that teaches children about climate change through engaging narratives and scientifically accurate art. Our cousin David was shaking his head in apparent disbelief. Isabella, this morning you were the family member we worried about financially. Tonight you're describing deals worth more money than most of us will see in our entire lifetimes. The observation highlighted the complete reversal that had occurred over the course of a single evening. The family disappointment had become the family success story, while the family success story was revealing herself to have fundamental disagreements with her own husband about the nature of meaningful work. Stephanie found her voice, though it sounded strained and uncertain. How is this possible? Yesterday you were just illustrating children's books. How does someone go from that to million-dollar television deals overnight? It didn't happen overnight, I explained gently. I've been building expertise in environmental education, developing storytelling techniques, and creating scientifically accurate art for years. The viral moment just made the entertainment industry notice work that was already professional quality. Marcus nodded emphatically. This is exactly what I was trying to explain about the children's environmental education market. The demand has been building for years, and Isabella was positioned perfectly to meet that demand. His validation felt particularly meaningful given the extensive research he'd apparently conducted into my industry. But more than that, his support was creating an obvious contrast with Stephanie's continued struggle to accept information that contradicted her worldview. But how did you know to position yourself in that market? Asked Uncle Miguel, his construction background giving him an appreciation for strategic career planning. I didn't know, I admitted. I just followed my interests in environmental science and my passion for creating art that could help children understand complex issues. The commercial success was never the goal. Which is probably why it worked, Marcus said, looking directly at his wife. Authentic passion tends to resonate more powerfully than calculated market positioning. The comment was clearly directed at Stephanie, another subtle criticism of the values system that prioritized financial outcomes over genuine engagement with meaningful work. I still don't understand, Stephanie said, her voice rising slightly with frustration. How does someone who lives in a studio apartment and drives a 15-year-old car suddenly become worth millions of dollars? The question revealed the depth of her confusion about the relationship between lifestyle choices and professional value. Stephanie had equated my modest living situation with lack of success, not recognizing that I'd been investing my resources in developing expertise rather than displaying wealth. Because I was reinvesting everything back into my work, I explained. Every dollar I didn't spend on expensive clothes or luxury apartments went toward research trips, art supplies, professional development. I was building expertise while living modestly. Our grandmother Elena nodded approvingly. That's how your grandfather and I built the landscaping business. Live simply, invest in your skills, focus on quality work. The parallel between my approach and our grandparents' business philosophy seemed to resonate with several family members, providing a framework for understanding how deliberate modesty could serve long-term professional goals. So all this time, our father said slowly, while we were worried about your financial future, you were actually building toward this kind of success? I was building toward meaningful work, I corrected. The financial success is a bonus that happened because environmental education became culturally important at the exact moment when my work was ready to meet that need. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and I could see something like relief in his expression. This is exactly why I was researching investment opportunities in artistic careers. Not because I thought art was impractical, but because I believed talented artists were undervalued by traditional market metrics. His comment created another moment of tension between him and Stephanie, who was clearly struggling to process revelations that undermined every argument she'd made about practical career choices. Marcus, Stephanie said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, are you saying you knew this was possible? That you expected Isabella's work to become this successful? Marcus considered the question carefully before responding. I knew her work was exceptional and that the market conditions were favorable for someone with her skills. I didn't predict viral success or bidding wars, but I recognized professional quality work with commercial potential. The implication was clear to everyone at the table. Marcus had seen value in my work that Stephanie had missed entirely, despite her supposed expertise in evaluating practical career choices, but the most significant moment was yet to come. As my family processed these revelations about my unexpected Success. I noticed Marcus checking his phone with increasing frequency, as if he was waiting for something. When he finally looked up, his expression was resolute in a way that suggested he'd made an important decision. Isabella, he said, his voice cutting through the family's ongoing amazement about my career news, I need to ask you something privately. Could we step outside for a moment? The request sent a ripple of surprise through the family, but also created a moment of obvious anxiety for Stephanie. Her husband wanted to have a private conversation with the sister she'd been publicly dismissing. All evening, at the exact moment when that sister had been revealed to be extraordinarily successful. Of course, I replied, curious about what Marcus might want to discuss away from family witnesses. As we stood to leave the table, I caught Stephanie's expression of barely concealed panic. She clearly had no idea what her husband might want to say to me privately, but given the evening's revelations about his research into my career and his criticisms of her treatment of artistic work, she had every reason to be concerned. What neither of us knew was that Marcus's request for my number would transform not just our relationship, but Stephanie's understanding of everything she thought she knew about success, loyalty, and the true nature of her marriage. The back porch felt like stepping into a different world after the heated atmosphere of the dining room. The December air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of snow and pine from the mountains visible in the distance. Marcus closed the sliding door behind us, creating a barrier between our conversation and the family still processing the evening's revelations. For several moments, we stood in comfortable silence, both of us seemingly needing time to decompress from the intensity of what had just unfolded. Marcus leaned against the porch railing, his expensive suit looking somehow less polished in the outdoor light, more human and approachable. I owe you an apology, he said finally, his voice carrying genuine regret. For not speaking up sooner about Stephanie's treatment of you, and for not intervening more directly when she was being cruel. The apology surprised me in its directness. Marcus, you're not responsible for your wife's behavior. And honestly, tonight was the first time anyone has ever defended my work so articulately. He shook his head, clearly not satisfied with being absolved so easily. I've been watching this pattern for 2 years, Isabella. Every family gathering, every time your name comes up in conversation, Stephanie finds ways to diminish your choices and mock your career. I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself that interfering would only make things worse. The admission revealed a depth of awareness about family dynamics that I hadn't expected. Marcus had been observing and analyzing the situation far more carefully than his silence had suggested. But tonight was different, he continued, turning to face me directly. When she started that speech about passion versus profit, about the superiority of practical career choices, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not when I knew how wrong she was about your work's value and potential. Through the sliding door, I could see our family still gathered around the dining table, their animated discussion suggesting they were dissecting every detail of my unexpected success. Stephanie sat apart from the group, her body language suggesting isolation rather than participation in the celebration. The research you mentioned, I said carefully, about investing in artistic careers. How long have you been thinking about that? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response. About 18 months. It started after I saw your exhibition at the downtown art walk. Stephanie had dragged me there to prove some point about local artists being amateur compared to real professionals. I remembered that exhibition, a small showing of environmental illustrations at a gallery in the arts district. I'd sold 3 pieces and considered it a modest success, but I'd had no idea anyone from my family had attended. Your work was the most sophisticated thing in the entire gallery, Marcus continued. The technical skill, the scientific accuracy, the emotional resonance of the storytelling. I went home that night and started researching the children's environmental education market because I couldn't believe work of that quality wasn't being recognized commercially. The revelation that he'd been following my career since that exhibition reframed every family gathering over the past year and a half. While I'd assumed he was politely tolerating his wife's artistic sister, he'd actually been conducting serious market research about my professional prospects. What I discovered, Marcus said, pulling out his phone, was that you were positioned at the center of multiple converging trends. Environmental awareness, educational innovation, children's media consumption patterns, streaming service content demands. He showed me what appeared to be a detailed spreadsheet tracking various industry metrics, publication dates, and market analyses. The document represented months of professional-level research into my specific career trajectory. Marcus, this is incredibly thorough, I said, scrolling through data that looked like it belonged in a venture capital firm's investment portfolio. You've been tracking my work more carefully than I have. Because I could see the potential that everyone else, including you, was missing, he replied. Your work wasn't just good art or meaningful education. It was the perfect combination of artistic excellence and market demand, positioned for exactly the kind of breakthrough that happened today. The analysis was both gratifying and overwhelming. Someone had been believing in my career's potential more strongly than I had, conducting the kind of strategic research that successful investors use to identify emerging opportunities. So when I mentioned wanting to invest in artistic careers, Marcus continued, I wasn't talking about general philanthropy or vague support for the arts. I was talking about you specifically. The admission hung between us, creating a moment of intensity that felt both flattering and complicated. My sister's husband had been secretly planning to invest in my career while she publicly dismissed it as impractical. Marcus, I said carefully, I have to ask why you're telling me this now, especially given what's happened with the streaming deals. He leaned against the railing again, his expression becoming more serious. Because tonight made me realize that I've been living a lie for the past 8 years. Pretending that financial success was worth abandoning artistic passion. Convincing myself that practical choices were superior to meaningful ones. The confession carried the weight of years of suppressed regret. Marcus had built a successful career and comfortable lifestyle, but at the cost of denying his authentic interests and values. Watching Stephanie dismiss your work while I knew how valuable it actually was, seeing her mock artistic careers while I secretly researched opportunities to support them, it made me understand how fundamentally dishonest I've become about what I actually believe matters. Through the door, I could see Stephanie standing from the table, apparently preparing to join us outside. The conversation we were having would need to shift soon, but Marcus seemed determined to finish his point. Isabella, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The seriousness in his voice made me focus entirely on his face, trying to read the intention behind his words. Given everything that's happened tonight, given what you now know about my research and my real feelings about artistic careers versus financial success, would you be willing to give me your number? The request hit me with unexpected force. This was the moment referenced in the story's title, the moment that would define everything that came next. But the context was more complex than I'd ever imagined. My number? I repeated, not sure I understood what he was asking. Because I want to leave Stephanie, Marcus said quietly, the words carrying the weight of a decision that had apparently been building for months or years. And I want to explore whether someone who shares my actual values about meaningful work and authentic living might be interested in getting to know me as the person I really am, rather than the person I've pretended to be. The confession was devastating in its honesty. Marcus wasn't just asking for my contact information. He was asking if I would consider a relationship with him, if I would be willing to explore whether the connection we'd discovered over shared appreciation for artistic work might extend beyond professional admiration. Before I could respond, the sliding door opened and Stephanie stepped onto the porch, her face flushed with the kind of desperate energy that comes from knowing your world is falling apart. What are you two talking about out here? She asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the conversation was about more than casual family discussion. Marcus straightened, his expression becoming resolute. Actually, Stephanie, I'm glad you're here. There's something I need to tell you. The three of us stood in the cold December air, forming a triangle of tension that would determine the future of 2 marriages, 2 careers, and 1 family's understanding of what success really meant. I've been unhappy in our marriage for a long time, Marcus said, addressing Stephanie directly but speaking loudly enough for me to hear every word. Tonight made me realize that our fundamental values are incompatible in ways that can't be resolved through compromise. Stephanie's face went pale. Marcus, whatever Isabella has said to you, whatever promises she's made about her sudden success, this isn't about Isabella's success, Marcus interrupted. This is about the fact that you spent the evening publicly humiliating someone whose work I've been secretly researching for investment opportunities. It's about the fact that you dismiss artistic careers while I regret abandoning my own artistic dreams. It's about the fact that we want completely different things from life. The confrontation was playing out exactly as the title had promised. But with emotional complexity I couldn't have anticipated. Marcus wasn't just asking for my number as a romantic overture. He was asking for my number as part of a complete restructuring of his life around values he'd been suppressing for years. Isabella, he said, turning to face me directly while Stephanie watched in growing horror, I know this is complicated, and I know the timing is terrible. But I can't pretend anymore that I'm happy living a life built around financial success rather than meaningful work. And I can't pretend that I haven't been more interested in your career, your values, and your approach to life than I've been in my own marriage for a very long time. Stephanie's sharp intake of breath cut through the cold air. Are you asking my sister for her phone number so you can leave me for her? The directness of the question forced all 3 of us to confront exactly what was happening. The family disappointment was being asked out by the successful husband, the sister who had been dismissed as a failure was being chosen over the sister who had been celebrated as a success, but the most important realization was still to come. As I looked between Marcus and Stephanie, I understood that this moment wasn't really about choosing between siblings or validating different approaches to career success. This was about the power of authentic living, the importance of aligning your actions with your values, and the way that genuine success, the kind built on meaningful work and honest relationships, always reveals itself eventually, no matter how carefully it's been hidden or how systematically it's been dismissed. The answer I gave Marcus would determine not just my own future, but whether this family would learn that the greatest disappointment isn't failing to achieve conventional success, but succeeding at the wrong things while abandoning what actually matters to your soul. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.